Okay, we're here with Pamela Greenwell, BSc, MSc, PhD.
No MSc, I'm
No
afraid.
MSc.
No, didn't go
Well,
down the
there you
route.
go. Look at that, that's cool. And she's going to tell us a little bit about how she got to where she is and what she enjoys about the University of Westminster. So, Pamela, could you tell us a little bit about your BSc first of all and how you got into that?
Yeah. So I don't come from an academic family, so that when I was about 16 or 17, I decided I wanted to do medicine. Basically because I wanted to be a surgeon. And I applied for medicine through UCAS and got rejected. And in fact, one of the interesting, I had an interview with, I think it was St Bartholomew's Hospital, and somebody asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, oh, I want to be a surgeon. And they gave me a 10-minute lecture on how many surgeons there were that were females in the UK. And somebody else said, why don't you just be a nurse? And at that stage, I got really quite dispirited. And in those days, there were polytechnics, which were technical colleges separate from universities. And I applied then to go to one of those on the advice of my careers teacher. And I went off, had an interview, got a place there, and studied applied biology with a cell biology option, and spent 4 years there. And the exciting thing was that it was a 4-year degree with 1 year out. And the year out was supposed to be spent in industry. And I never really quite understood what industry was. So I had an interview, my very first ever interview. I set off to, oh gosh, the food research establishment actually in south of London. And I went there and it was awful. It was about pouring plates all day long. And one of my friends wanted the job, and I came back and I said to the guy who'd sent me there, I turned it down because one of my friends wanted it. And I got a lecture for about 15 minutes on "You will never turn down one of these things again, Greenwell." So the next one came up, and I was sent off to the Lister Institute of Preventive Medicine, and they offered me the job for a year. And I went back to my tutor, and I said, well, I'm going to have to take this, I suppose. He said, no choice, you take this and that's it. So I took it, and I remember saying to a friend of mine, I can't imagine how I'm going to do 1 whole year of research on blood. Can you imagine anything more boring than working on blood? That year was the best year I ever had. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was the junior technician. I did everything from washing up tubes to making saline solutions to cleaning up the rubbish, spinning out blood. You name something that in the laboratory, I'm probably doing. I also, in that time, got my very first paper, which was amazing.
Publication, something that people always go after.
Yeah, so more by good luck than good judgment, and I got a paper out of the work that I'd done there. So by the time I'd finished there, and I was really reluctant to leave, I went back to university, and they said if I could get a 2-1, they would take me on as a PhD student. But at the time, there was a huge problem because the Lister Institute of Preventive Medicine had just gone bust.
Oh.
So effectively, I was made redundant in my sandwich year. So it was a bit hit and miss, but the group went on to Clinical Research Centre out at Harrow. And I was very lucky. I worked hard enough to get my 2-1. My dad always said I never worked hard enough because I worked hard enough for a 2-1 and not for a first.
I see.
On the other hand, I only needed a 2-1. And
that's an argument that many people, I'm sure, have.
And I think, not unlike many of us students, I worked to what I needed to get. And at the end of it then, started working as a PhD student out at Harrow. And then spent...
What was your PhD on? Out of
it's
interest.
got this wonderfully long title. Glycosyltransferase is involved in the biosynthesis of human blood group ABO antigens. It's about this long. Never have a title that long because you pay for every letter on the final thesis in gold. And I remember paying a very large sum of money because I had the longest title in the universe.
Okay, that's cool. And in like human terms, what was you looking at in your PhD?
So what we were looking at were blood groups, and at the time I was very lucky to work in a group, had been very lucky to work in a group, who were the people who discovered that human ABO blood groups and some of the other blood groups were sugar antigens. And they had won prizes for doing that. It had been a huge breakthrough in science. And I went on to look at the enzymes that made the sugars. And I was very fortunate to be with such a good group and a really dynamic group. Lucky, went off loads of places all over the world.
Yeah.
Went to my very first conference, I think, when I was trying to think. I suppose I was about second year of my PhD. I was out in Paris giving a talk, which was absolutely fantastic. And I just got the bug. and it's awful. Science for me is something which I thoroughly enjoy. I love bench science, I love research.
You love wet lab work?
I adore wet lab work, more than anything else in the universe. It's the one thing I found that A, I was good at, and B, I discovered something about myself that I didn't know. I think, like many students, when I was at university, before I went out into the lab, I remember saying to people, I don't understand how anybody has an idea about research. I can't see where ideas come from. I can't imagine thinking about some new research project because, yeah, I can't see how that happens. And I was pretty convinced when I was at university, before I went off to this placement, that I was going to teach. Would go to teacher training college and teach. And doing this 1 year, I discovered something in me. And that was that I did understand how research happened. And I did have ideas. And there were people around there who were prepared to let me chase these ideas. And I could get paid for it.
Yeah.
And I got a PhD out of it, for goodness sake. How cool was this?
And that's what made you really feel like research is for you.
Yeah.
So, is your PhD anything to do with what you're doing nowadays? Or?
Well, it is. I stayed with the same people for 14 years. I've only ever had 2 jobs in my life,
That's
really.
a long time.
So I stayed with them for 14 years until my boss retired. And the MRC at the time was cutting corners and whatever else, and not renewing contracts on resignations of heads of department. So I started to look around for a job. And the reason I came to Westminster is quite strange. I've been offered effectively 3 jobs. I've been offered a job working in the blood service, working as a principal scientific officer on rare blood groups out at the International Research on Rare Blood Groups out of Bristol. I don't like Bristol, so that was a non-starter.
Right, Bristol.
Bristol, yeah. And the other was either here, which at the time was the Polytechnic of Central London, or Imperial. Now, you may think that Imperial was a good bet, but Imperial was absolutely gruesome. I went for an interview, and it was a very strange interview, because apart from anything else, they were very interested in why I'd gone to a polytechnic and not a university. And that might be something that some students
And is that
might
because
feel
you
about.
clearly had the educational history for a university, whereas
So
a polytechnic was considered below par, like for an institution like that? Or?
Imperial just couldn't get their brain around it. So that it was a huge problem in that kind of respect. But the reason I turned it down was because it was boring. It was as boring as hell. You had to lecture. Okay, you could do your research, it was great, you had to lecture. And they said that I could have the left knee.
Of the left knee?
The left knee. So I could become an expert in the human left knee. And if I was a really good lecturer, maybe I could move on to the right knee.
The right knee, okay, yeah.
And I thought,
Which
well,
is
there's something wrong.
Different from the
I'm
left
not
knee,
sure.
or?
And I thought to myself, can I see myself doing this? And you had to turn up, you had to cut up cadavers, and it's not something I was worried about, but you had to come in at 8 o'clock in the morning to cut up a cadaver before the students came, so you could show it all cut up, so that they could then go off and do it. And I pointed out this was a bit of a dumb thing to do, because actually you could have done it the night before. Or alternatively, why don't you make videos of this? Because that would surely be much more useful. And you could stop and start them and whatever else. So they didn't particularly like me because I was a bit of a radical. And they offered the job and I said, no, I don't think I can work with you. It was really strange, and the atmosphere was very strange. The teaching was quite different. I don't know whether you've ever been to some of these universities. You teach in your own pet research area. And the way they do the teaching is that effectively I would get something to teach, I'd walk in, I'd teach it, I'd walk out. There's no student interaction, no student knocking at your door, you don't get to know the people, and it's not something I like. And it was the one thing that I knew polytechnics did, because I'd been there and done that. I'd got my own degree from a polytechnic.
Yeah.
And I liked polytechnics, because polytechnics were about more hands-on technical training, rather than airy-fairy degrees about the left knee or the right knee or whatever else. And when I came here, the only reason they took me on was because they were starting a new master's degree in molecular biology, which I'd learnt because it was effectively what was coming on board, and I'd been away and learning molecular biology for my research. And there were very few molecular biologists in 1989.
Yeah.
So I applied as a molecular biologist. Chris Buck was here running research, and he noted that I was a glycobiologist, as was he. So he thought to get a molecular biologist to teach and a glycobiologist in the research group was an ace thing, and they offered me the job.
Nice.
And I've never regretted it. I actually don't tell everybody. Don't tell everybody. I've never regretted it.
No.
I love my research. Research is really my life, but I do enjoy teaching. I enjoy trying to get information over to students. I enjoy seeing students mature. I suppose I enjoy seeing them get out of science what I get out of science. And if I can do that, if you can get the spark in the students so they're excited about it, then I don't know, it's such a fantastic feeling. It's really bizarre. So I have, for example, on my Facebook page, I have a lot of my old students. I have some of my old students from the 1980s, and we keep in touch, and it's great. And seeing them develop and seeing what they've gone on and done.
And have any of your ex-students become your colleagues? Or?
Not here, elsewhere.
But in research projects that you have outside of the university?
Yeah. So that, and we've got lots of very good students. In fact, I was talking to Mark earlier about giving you some student profiles. You know, I've had students, one of my students from 3 years ago did a project with me, Roya. She's now doing her PhD in Oxford.
Yeah.
It's incredible. There are people I'm talking to on Facebook. Don't tell anybody else that we do Facebook a lot, but I talk to people on Facebook.
Have you seen the new film? The social
No.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. You should see it.
But yeah, there are people there who are effectively running their own companies,
Yeah.
who have done PhDs. There are people who've gone on and done medicine. A couple of my MSc students have actually started medicine this year, post-grad. You know, and it's fantastic to see how they've got on and where they're going, and to be a very small part of that.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's great.